tubes onto Dunlop well base type wheels. When they have this well in here, that's what they mean by the well based. And that area is where you put the bead of the tire when you're taking them on and taking them off. It makes it easier. If it was straight across here, you would have a much difficult time. And the straight across ones are usually the ones that have the snap rings. So these do not have snap rings. These are for usually found on the British cars. The Springfield cars are the ones that use, they're the straight-sided ones, and they're the ones that use the snap rings. But again, these don't have snap rings. So anyway, I like to put a protective covering over the spokes, and that's what this vinyl type of tape is, and it's very thick, actually 20 mil. So 20 mil comes out to, let me just give a quick measurement. So 20 mil comes out to about 25 thousandths. And it would have been, originally there would have been a, what would be called a rim guard there. And I'll show you that on one of the other wheels, but I just wanted to show you how this looked when it was applied. And of course we have to cut a hole in for the inner tube valve stem, but I like to get it wrapped all the way across, and I'll wrap towards the outside first and then transfer to this side and then do a wrap around the center. And that's so that you can minimize any rough edge that could chafe into the inner tube. So it used to be when you had this type of wheel, you would use a well-based inner tube. And here's an old well-based inner tube. So this portion that goes into the well, it's over the spokes, is much, much heavier than the other portion. Very, very thick in there. Unfortunately, this type of inner tube is no longer available. And what is available is something that is just so much lighter. The quality just is not the same. And this is very unfortunate, but that's just the way things are. So this is significantly lighter, significantly thinner. I think that the company says that they are good for about 5 years. So that means you're going to have some that last 2 years and some that might last 8 or even 10. But, you know, 5 years in an old car is not a very long time. So you need to keep that in mind. You also need a fairly large size valve stem, because it's a pretty big hole in these. And you want to be able to fill up that area. For a while, I was getting an Excelsior inner tube, and it was a nice inner tube. It was heavy, not quite as heavy as the well base, but it was heavy all the way around. Probably like 3/4 or so of the well base type, and it had a metal valve stem, and it fit nicely into the valve stem hole of the wheel. And I really liked those inner tubes, but for some reason they're now not available. And, you know, all this is due to people just aren't driving their cars and the diminished interest in the hobby. So the supply and demand just is not there for making a lot of these products. And sometimes even tires can get incredibly hard to get, which I never thought I would see that day, that tires and inner tubes would be difficult to get. But we are sort of in those times now. And I also blame the consumer to some degree. Everybody nowadays expects everything to be super quick, super cheap, and of the best quality. So they want Rolls-Royce quality parts and pieces and perishable, replaceable items, but they don't want to pay hardly anything, and they expect to have it on their doorstep within a day. So, you know, I kind of blame Amazon for that, and Walmart and some of these other places. But anyway, that's just sort of how things are going. So if you're a consumer, if you're in, you have an interest in these old cars, you know, if you end up paying a little bit more for something and it's a better quality, then just be thankful that you were able to do that. So anyway, I'm going to give an example of how I like to wrap this material on. So this wheel's done, so I'm going to take it off and get it out of the way. I hope. This is what was very similar to what was used originally. Even though it would have been a well-based center tube, they still would have had this, and this would be what they would refer to as a rim guard. Now, a straight-sided wheel would have a flap, which is a very big, heavy rubber, you know, flap, just as it is referred to. And that would go all the way across, and again, that would be a flat-sided rim. But these, you know, this is just a spoke guard, and this one is old, and it's really stuck on there, and it needs to come off. So we're going to get this off and out of the way. And while we're doing these types of things, we want to always keep an eye on the wheel, look for cracks, any serious rust corrosion areas that could compromise the integrity of the wheel. So these wheels are in very nice condition, very nice shape. These aren't as prone to cracks as the Springfield type, but they can crack in this area. These have been nicely rolled over, and there's no sharp edges, and so that's one of the reasons why they're less resistant to cracking, whereas the other ones have some hard edges and hard turns. But these can crack along here, sometimes even along here. Sometimes these rolled over edges can fill up with rust, and you'll hear rust rattling around in there. But again, these are in very nice condition. So this might be a slightly younger rim flap because it's not stuck on there and still has some flexibility. So I'll get this off. Just checking things out for cracks, corrosion. Everything looks good. So we're going to get our tape on. Make sure it stays good and stuck in the beginning, otherwise it'll have a tendency to fall off. Pulling it taut like this helps to get a nice smooth wrap. So we reached the overlap point. So now we cut over to the other side. Then we overlap that a little bit. And then we wrap in the middle. Now some may feel that you only really need the wrapping in the middle on the spoke heads, but since these inner tubes are nowhere near as thick as the original well-base type, I think you need to have the wrap all the way across. Now we use our scalpel to open up the valve stem hole, which is right here. Okay, so we have a nice clean hole there. Another thing I want to point out is that these are referred to as an offset valve stem. So instead of the valve stem sticking straight up, it comes out a little bit to the side, and that's because the valve stem hole doesn't go straight, it comes out a little bit on the side. And if you don't use an offset valve stem type tube, you're going to stress out this area of the inner tube and possibly the inner tube will fail. Another thing to mention is that this is a car that's in regular use. So the wheel weights, I kept the wheel weight and all the hardware on. But if you painted the wheels or did anything else and these were off, you have to put the bolts in because they go all the way through before you get the tires and inner tubes on. So do keep that in mind. Okay, so we're now ready to mount our new tire onto the rim. So before anything, I like to fill the tire up with a fair amount of talcum powder, which helps to prevent the tube from chafing and rubbing against the tire on the inside and keep things sort of in a dry atmosphere in there, or at least that's what I've always been told. So now you have two options, of course, with how to start the rim in. And if you have unpainted wheels or you didn't freshly paint your wheels, then putting it in this direction is your best bet. If you have freshly painted wheels and you don't want to mar up this area, then go in this way. But it'll be a little harder to do the final closing up. So start by rim into the tire. You may need to do a little leveraging. Then we get the inner tube in position. This tool is invaluable for doing this job. I just don't know any other way you're going to get the valve stem in position and hold it tight while you close up the tire. So you put that in. And then you want to position the inner tube to make sure you have the offset going in the right direction, which would be like this. Otherwise you're going to be in big trouble. So you thread on the valve stem keeping tool. And feed the inner tube in. You want to make sure you don't flip the inner tube. That would be not good at all. Rather bad, actually. I have taken old inner tubes out where people have flipped it, and the tire had an irregularity from it. So it ruined the tire and the tube. Now surprisingly, this can be a little bit of a challenge, stretching the inner tube in and getting it into the well of the rim. I find sometimes a piece of wood can be a great aid with this. You don't want to use anything metal because you can puncture the tube, and you want to make sure you get it properly placed in there. Okay, and again make sure that the inner tube went in there nicely and isn't gonna get pinched in the rim and then between the rim and the bead. So now we can get our valve stem pulled through. valve stems I'm not too crazy about, these very short ones. They can be a bit of a bugger. So get them through as much as you can. Sometimes I just flip around the keeper just to keep the valve stem from creeping back in. And now we can close the tire up. Now the best thing to do is to do as much of it as you can with your feet. And if you're either really good or really lucky, you won't need to use any tire iron or anything to, as long as you don't get your shoe stuff in there. So the more you use the tire iron, the tube. And we certainly don't want that. So again, walking it on with your feet, like this, is your best bet. Now this is a new tire, it's fairly flexible, so if you get an old, stiff tire, it's not going to do that well. So then we can get our valve stem back in position and inflate the wheel. I see it creeping out over there.